Was there an official response from Roman officials, including Pontius Pilate himself, that confirmed that Yeshua's body, after execution, did disappear from his tomb? We'll analyze the skeptic versus apologist debate in this matter and see who actually makes sense. Recently, I saw a movie called Risen. The script was based on a Roman centurion, the one who pierced Yeshua's side with his spear as he was dying on the cross, to largely finish the job. And the legend goes, because it is legend, that this Roman centurion eventually converted to Christianity and was even martyred for the cause. Now, this story doesn't come from the traditional Gospels, it's from one of the ones in the Apocrypha. And throughout the plot of the movie, it showed how Pontius Pilate had a severe reaction upon hearing the news that Christ rose from the dead and launched an intensive investigation to find the body in order to disprove this rumor. So that got me curious to look up the details of this tale and whether there was actually any evidence that corroborates this legend. And I found there wasn't, not a shred. But it gave me the basis for this episode of, did the Roman government have a reaction upon hearing that the tomb of Christ was empty 3 days after the execution? For if there was a serious reaction by Rome and its officials, that does corroborate with the secular source that the event did occur as depicted in the Gospels. And if they did have this reaction, that would greatly push me towards possibly believing that the event could have happened, since we don't have any authorship of the actual supposed witnesses of the matter. And there was a Christian apologist that claimed that he did have evidence that the Yeshua resurrection was indeed legitimate through a response by not only several Roman officials, but Pontius Pilate himself. And this apologist's name was Jonathan Sheffield, and his information came from a transcript in a debate with the known skeptic Richard Carrier. And I looked at both sides to see who was presenting logic and reason and who wasn't, as I'll show throughout the video. And first we go to Richard Carrier, and the response during his portion of the debate was basically the Roman government's response to the tale of Christ rising from the dead was that there was no response at all, that there was no evidence that Pontius Pilate even heard or cared about the aftermath of Yeshua's execution at all, and that largely the later St. Paul was laughed off as a lunatic during a hearing when he was detained by a Roman governor named Festus. So basically, there wasn't a Roman response at all, or inquiry or investigation that was directed towards why the body of Jesus was missing from the empty tomb. But Jonathan Sheffield, the Christian apologist, believes differently. Of course he does, he's a Christian apologist. He tries to show the legitimacy of the Yeshua resurrection with 3 major points. In his first contention, I find nothing but absurd. His basic premise is because the Roman officials never once filed a report or confirmation that the resurrection was false, therefore it must have happened. And I'm not even sure what to say to this. Why would Rome write a report about anything, Jonathan? It's very obvious that they didn't take this resurrection superstition seriously. And again, Mr. Sheffield, like all the apologists, tries to quote Pliny the Younger and Tacitus of simply reporting that Christians believe these superstitions, which are quoted as being debased and destructive and mischievous, so therefore the superstitions are correct. Neither Pliny nor Tacitus believed this. The reason they're even noting it at all is because the rising Christianity based on this superstition was perceived as being a political threat to Rome's stability. So yes, they were addressing that this is what Christians believed, but they're not giving the story legitimacy. As said, when Paul was taken into custody and questioned by Festus, he was written off as a lunatic. So why then would they commence an investigation on the matter? That's just an unbelievably weak argument that Mr. Sheffield presents. But then he continues on. He points to something called the Nazareth inscription. Now, I've covered this before in another video because this point of quote archaeological evidence was also used by the Associates for Biblical Research. It is a piece of marble with inscription on it that warns of serious consequence for any future grave robbers. And their conclusion is this inscription was written after the body of Yeshua disappeared. Again, because the Romans were worried that the perception of Christ being divine would threaten Rome's political stability. So if you don't bother to do any research at all, that makes complete sense, doesn't it? Just like Mr. Sheffield and the Associates for Biblical Research present. But here's what they didn't tell you. it is not only not confirmed that this piece of marble with its inscription is related to Christ's empty tomb, it isn't even probable. The estimated date for this piece of archaeological evidence ranges from 50 BC to 50 AD. That's a 100-year spread. And also the marble has been traced to come from another location, the island of Kos. And it's thought that inscription might be related to another tyrant named Nicaeus in that area. And they're not saying for sure that they know this marble was related to Nicaeus, but there's really no evidence to suggest it's related to Jesus' empty tomb either, especially since we don't even know if there was an empty tomb or Christ was placed in a tomb at all. As the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which apologists like William Lane Craig keep saying is thought to be the tomb of Christ by general consensus, is only the consensus of other apologists. There is no general historical consensus that confirms that this was the tomb of Christ at all. Jonathan Sheffield is making a wild jump speculation that first we know that Christ was actually put in a tomb, and second that this Nazareth inscription is related to it specifically. He is simply taking a remote possibility and confirming it as fact according to his worldview. And the third rabbit that he tries to pull out of the hat are the supposed reports from Pilate to the Emperor Tiberius, which a remorseful Pilate states that he thinks an innocent man was crucified, and on top of that, should possibly be placed as a divine god next to the Roman ones. And he states this comes from the writings of Tertullian and Justin Martyr. And even a general Google search will tell you that the vast consensus of scholars outside of the apologists do not believe that Pilate wrote this report at all. This Acts of Pilate, so to speak, which also didn't make it into the mainstream Bible, is thought to be complete fiction. The scholars not only think that Justin Martyr and Tertullian got their sources largely from hearsay, but didn't have any confirmation of legitimacy at all. And Sheffield knows that with his level of education. And this is what irritates me about these guys and is why I come after them so hard. Jonathan Sheffield has taken 3 points that are completely at best wild speculation and at worst flat out untruths, and tries to pass it off as if this is solid concrete evidence that confirms the legitimacy of the Yeshua resurrection. There is not one single thing he has said here that is based on fact. He has stated that because the Roman officials didn't launch an investigation of something that they immediately wrote off as nonsense, so therefore the superstition must be true. He has pointed to a piece of archaeological evidence in the Nazareth inscription that isn't even confirmed to be in Christ's time, but according to Sheffield's worldview must be related to Christ. And he's taken the Acts of Pilate and tried to manipulate a theory that Pontius Pilate realized his mistake and now must concede that Yeshua was indeed divine like he said he was. And all of this is simply untrue. A piece of writings that are largely debunked by every other scholar who doesn't operate with extreme bias. And the thing is this, Jonathan, you're talking to somebody who wants to be convinced of the legitimacy of the resurrection. So I should be very easy to convince, shouldn't I? But I also have to maintain objectivity, and I can't be convinced when your arguments are so slipshod and ridiculous. And these contentions do enter the land of ridiculous. If this debate was actually being scored by objective judges, you would have lost on every point, because you continue to prove what every apologist does. You don't state evidence that is there, such as we have good evidence that Paul existed. We have good evidence of Yeshua's trial and execution. No, you engage in the logical fallacy of taking points that are confirmed as facts and then simply making up other truths. And every time I get a comment from a Christian on my episodes stating that I am wrong and that there is all sorts of evidence confirming the legitimacy of the resurrection, this is the type of evidence they actually present if you would bother to do the research. And do not expect me to align myself with this nonsense until you learn to present actual evidence and facts. And if you'd like to read a tale with no evidence or facts, check out my novel The Second Fall, an offbeat Armageddon sure to offend the fundamentalist, and probably a few others. Link is on the video description as well as the banner on the channel page, and I will see you next time as we once again take that sword of reason and reality and thrust it right through the heart of ignorance.